Hey, what is up, everybody? Platform Disciple here, and I am bringing you, at long last, a review of the Wave 2 cards, which have been out for a little while. Unfortunately, I have not been able to really test all of them because I don't own them yet, but I'm just gonna give you my general thought. And in addition, I was able to get in touch with S or ES. I'm not sure what his preferred way of pronouncing his username is. But he is the king of Rift Run. I was hoping that I would be able to point him out on the top 10. He's ordinarily up there. But he also just recently became a community monitor, I believe it is the role. But point is, he's a good guy, and he is really, really good at Rift Run, and I got his opinion on the new cards in terms of how effective he thinks they might be in Rift Run. And I'm going to share with you both my opinions and his opinions. And we're going to start this off with, we're just going to go in order. Warpath cards, Defiant Hunter. As far as Rift Run goes, S thinks that it's got solid stats. I have a little cheat sheet down here, by the way, in case you see me looking at that. And this is going to apply for probably all the Defiant cards because it is a cycle. Each faction has one, other than Sleepers. The situational overcharge effect, if you manage to pull it off, will put you ahead in board presence potentially by a turn, which is really, really huge if you can pull it off early on. So overall, pretty good card as far as Rift Run goes. And my opinion of the card for constructed is, it's got good stats for a 2-drop. If you look at other Warpath cards, I mean, you ordinarily think, well, Warpath is just a ball of stats, but the fact of the matter is, in the 2-drop slot, there's not really that many strong cards as far as stats go, because we got Brings Life by Passing, which doesn't have stats. Caretaker, similar thing. And then we've got a couple more. We've got Swift Hunter, who's got substantially worse stats than the Defiant Hunter. Admittedly, Swift Hunter has haste, but that's a whole different story. Rabid Rabbit, it's got kind of situational stats because of the Bloodthirst thing. It has the potential to be really big. This also could not really have a lot of effect. It's not as aggressive as the point. And Drop Bear, which has great stats once you enrage it, but the turn it comes out, it's very weak. So yeah, Defiant Hunter fills a slot that Warpath didn't really have before. And then, of course, we've got the overcharge effect. And we gotta keep in mind that these overcharge effects are only as viable as the cards that you can overcharge them with. Before I continue, I'm just gonna point out that there are other ways to trigger that effect because it says if they're removed from your hand, deck, or graveyard. It's just the easiest way to take advantage of this effect is with a card with overcharge. And I mean, each of the factions, or a lot of the factions, got new cards with overcharge, which we're gonna get to, but there's not always an easy way to take advantage of that effect. One thing that Warpath has that you can use to basically guarantee that you're going to get overcharges is in the 3-drop slot. If you put this guy in your command zone, I think it's Hunt's Cowardly or something like that. We're gonna give it a shot. Trax? Maybe it's Trax. Yeah, here we go. Trax the Cowardly. So this card you can overcharge at any time, which means that you could, on the first turn of the game, overcharge your Defiant Hunter, which is kind of a big deal. But not every faction is going to have something from the command zone that you're going to be able to overcharge with, like whenever you want. And in addition to that, not every overcharge card is worth playing necessarily. The other overcharge card that I'm looking at for Warpath is Adaptive Hulker, which I think it's okay. And if you manage to overcharge the Hunter, it's even better. But that's besides the point. We're moving on. Going back to, where is it? Set Rebellion. got Speaks with Wind, and S's opinion on the card is that it's playable and has good stats. And at the mid-game stage, it can have like a big presence on the board. So pretty playable. My opinion of the card is that, I mean, if you want to like compare it to the, if you're gonna go for the 3-drop version, that's like playing a one of many that has +4/+3, which is pretty good. But I believe the way the card works is that you have to actually have 5 resources to play it. You can't just play it as a 3-drop. So what you're really looking at is a 5-drop that can leave you resources open to play a 2-drop alongside it. So I think it's an iffy card. In Constructed, it has some potential, but it's definitely not something that strikes me as like really up there. All right, let's move on. Defiant Engineer. Now S says that, I mean, if you manage to get this card in Rift Run alongside Taiga, you have the potential to have a AoE buff effect synergy, which could work out really well. But aside from that, the card's super situational because you have to have your guys in the support zone. You have to be able to overcharge the thing, and its stats are just like not really what you'd want as far as Genesis goes. He's not artificial, so not great. My opinion of the card is similar for Constructed, because I don't see the AoE buff effect as that great, especially when for Genesis you have Luca, which is just so much easier to do because you don't have to have any overcharge business involved. It's a similar AoE. They don't have to be in the support zone. Admittedly, it only affects artificial characters, but the Defiant Engineer is, I believe, double Genesis Purity. So if you're not using artificial characters, it's a pretty weird deck in the first place. Crazed Augmenter. This guy right here, S says that he's not really quite sure about it yet as far as Rift Run goes, but if you do manage to pull off the overcharge onto something like a flyer or another critical character, you can really go pretty deep with the card. But that aside, it's got pretty poor stats. And one thing I'd like to point out is I'm under the impression that the card works like support drone, so it can overcharge itself theoretically, which is a 5-cost 14/14, which is not bad. But my personal opinion, as far as Constructed goes, is that it's just not enough power for a 5-drop. Even if you're buffing something like a flyer, you've got such good buffs in the Genesis faction, and it's not artificial. And my personal opinion is that if you're too into Genesis, you're probably going to be using artificial characters predominantly. That's just my opinion, but we'll wait and see. I don't think this card's got much going for it. Defiant Brute. Now, S says for draft, this effect is just not what you're looking for as far as Veror is concerned, because in draft, the people who should care about what's in their opponent's hand should be the people playing against Veror, because you're trying to look to dodge Mass Death or Death Ray, other cards that don't have an effect unless the character's on the board. And like, you just don't need that kind of insight into what's your opponent's hand against the other factions, not nearly as much. My opinion of the card is that my initial opinion is that the effect that you can get for overcharging it is quite interesting and could be very, very, very good in Constructed, depending on what's going on, what faction you're against. But in addition to that, the Veror faction has a lot more cards that you can overcharge things with, in terms of spells. You've got Overcharged Storm and Bolt just to begin with, and this was even before the overcharge mechanic was introduced. And then we've got a whole slew of other cards, which I think have varying playability, but the point is you have more options open to you. And I'm also going to throw it out there, although I don't think this is a huge factor, but it's a 2-drop for Veror that has, like, not horrible stats as far as Veror is concerned, and it's a demon, so it's got that going for it if you can't overcharge it. I think the card's interesting. It could be good. It might not be. Intimidating Brute. Stats, as far as S says, are too weak for a 5 cost, and that it's probably just not your first pick and draft. Not a great card. My opinion as far as constructed goes is I'm bringing up again that it's a demon. Could put it in a demon deck. Definitely not going to be a strong card. But I could imagine using it as maybe a 2 of, maybe a 1 of in a double Veror demon deck. Outside of that, it's I think Veror's, when you're double into Veror, you're, aside from maybe a demon deck, you're going to be doing mostly spells. The effect on it, your opponent's characters get -1/-0. The more characters they have, of course, the more effective that ability is, and depending on the circumstances, it could be really, really, really relevant or really, really, really not relevant. Not that great a card. And you're probably thinking to yourself, there's a trend right now, which is these cards are just not as flashy as the Wave 1 cards, but that is in large part because these are commons, and you can't expect every card to be just mind-blowing. So this is more or less what you'd expect from commons, I think. Every once in a while you have commons that are just really good, but not every common has to be really good. Okay, so moving on. We've got Defiant Footman. S says that it's pretty viable, especially for if you manage to get like a token deck that generates a lot of characters, or a swarm deck. If you manage to pull that effect off, it's really, really good. So if you manage to be able to overcharge it, very powerful. And my opinion, as far as constructed goes, is that this, I think, out of all the Defiant cards, probably has the most potential, because +2/+0 on all your characters is really, 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 really good in Double Flame Dawn. Your weakness, of course, is that you don't necessarily have that many ways to overcharge it. Its stats are slightly lower than what you want for Flame Dawn. Just to compare, Flame Dawn 2-drops that I think are the best is probably the Paladin. Let me get him up here. This guy has 1 more health, charge, can't be killed. So as far as stats go, the Defiant Footman's just not as great. But as far as overcharging him goes, you do have one thing that stands out, which is that you've got Intimidating Rally, which lets you overcharge multiple cards. So if you have multiple Defiant Footmans in your hand, you can get rid of their entire defense zone while giving your guys a large boost. So it turns Intimidating Rally from, what it currently is, to Intimidating Rally plus, what is it called? Might be Warcry. Yeah, Warcry. It basically turns Intimidating Rally into Intimidating Rally plus a potential free Warcry. Maybe a little better, maybe a little worse, depending on the scenario, depending on how many footmen you have in your hand. So I think that card has a lot of potential for constructed, relative to the other cards we've looked at thus far. The one thing I want to bring up, aside from that, is that the buff is permanent. Unlike Warcry, that's 1 turn. The buff is permanent, so really anytime you pull it off, it's quite good. Once again, of course, the more characters, the better. But this card seems quite quite strong to me. Morningstar Accelerator, S says it's got good stats, but if you're looking at the same slot, you've got to compete the card with the, what is it, Cavalry Paladin. So you're looking at a similar kind of role of a card, which is a large statted character that comes down with charge and hits hard. Primary difference is that the Accelerator, of course, you have to overcharge, but has substantially better stats. And then the Cavalry Paladin, the other thing to note about it is that it's got that nice cannot be killed by non-damage sources, which against certain factions is extremely important, particularly Veror, and against other factions, not so much. My personal opinion about the card versus Cavalry Paladin, as far as Rift Run goes, which S didn't bring up, is that Cavalry Paladin is a rare, whereas the Accelerator is a common. So you're probably going to see more Accelerators in Rift Run than you're going to see Cavalry Paladin. So even if Cavalry Paladin is the better card, you sometimes have to settle for what you can get in Rift Run. But as far as constructed goes, 5-drop is a little much for Flame Dawn. A 5-drop has to really, 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 really pull its weight, in my opinion, and I don't know if the Accelerator is gonna be able to pull its weight all the time. You have to overcharge it by turn 5. You may have a pretty empty hand. You might not want to be throwing away your last couple cards. It does hit really, really hard, but my opinion is that Harbinger of Light, is it of Light? Maybe I got the card wrong. No, I got it right. Harbinger of Light. This is a 5-drop that looks to me to be better in Flame Dawn. It does half as much damage, but gets your opponent's cards out of the defense zone. And by turn 5, if everything has gone well, you're just trying to get in for the last few points of damage, which you're probably going to want to do through cheesing your opponent's defense zone out of the way. That's my opinion. All right, moving on.